Daniel chapter 12. Let's go and get our Bibles open there. All righty. And as you know, of course, Daniel chapter 12, verse 1 is the point of intersection between Daniel and Revelation. And so let's go ahead and do just a little bit of review on the significance of Daniel 12. Daniel 12 intersects with Revelation chapter 12. And it starts by revealing this line. See this line? Okay. All right, fine. It won't get any better than that on Time Change Sunday. So if you didn't like that joke, the rest of them are going to fall flat for sure. We usually think of the abomination of desolation as the event that marks the exact middle of the week. There's nothing particularly wrong with that. It is an event that occurs in the midst of the week. And I have labored in time past to get that language in the midst of the week to mean at the very center, specifically at the very particular point of the middle. And, and I've done some work on that. In fact, I think it's in the present version of my book on Daniel. I offer a paragraph or two looking at the language in the midst, attempting to find in it justification to say it marks the exact middle of the week. But I've always had trouble with that. I mentioned in prayer meeting this morning that every time I go through the book of Daniel in any study, I always come across deeper insight. That my insights get deeper and my understanding of the book gets more clear, and I see things I didn't really see before. It's like looking at, I was in St. Petersburg years ago, and my first opportunity to visit the, I think it's called the Hermitage. And it's basically a museum. Okay, it is called the Hermitage, that's right. So I went in there, and they have a room dedicated to high-end art. I mean, people like Da Vinci and Rembrandt and some of these guys. And I remember over the period of the 4 or 5 days that I was there, I wanted to visit that room every day. So I tried to get over there as often as I could. I did notice that each time I got in there, there was one particular painting by Rembrandt that I was very much attracted to. And so I would go over and just stand in front of that painting and just look at it. And what was interesting to me is each time I looked at that painting, I saw something new, something I hadn't quite noticed last time I looked at the same painting. Anybody just looking at a photo of it, I mean, you cannot experience a painting like that in a photograph. I'm telling you, you just can't. It's just something else. I'm standing there and I'm looking at this thing, and it's so deep, it's so rich. I don't want to get lost in the description of that painting and my experience of it. The only point I wanted to make is I noticed every time I looked at it, I saw something else that I had not noticed last time. Some little something or other in that painting that just caught my attention the next time I looked at it that I didn't even notice the first time. So my theory is that when you look at something for the first time, you just sort of take it in the whole thing. When you look at it again, you start looking at it a little more closely and you start focusing on different areas of it. And I believe that's the way it is with me in the Bible. First time I go through a book, you're just kind of getting the gist and the overall picture of what's being revealed there. The next time I look at it, because I've got that in place now, now I can focus my attention here or here or here or here. And so that's been my experience with the Bible. And with Daniel, like I said, I've always had a few things that were kind of troubling to me. Not troubling in the sense of like, wow, if I don't figure this out, I might not get into heaven. Not that kind of troubling. Just, questions, just stuff that, that didn't quite line up. And this is one of them. It just kept suggesting itself to my mind that the event called the abomination of desolation that we always mark as signaling the middle of the week, there's just so much involved in that event that it was difficult for me to reconcile that as being the event that marked the exact middle. It does occur in the midst of the week. There's no question about that. But I kept being troubled by the fact that language elsewhere always meant at around that time or within that period so-called, like in the year of, so on. Anyway, finally this time through, I spent time looking at that particular question exclusively for several hours and began to see something emerge that actually I had noticed before. And so I realized all of a sudden that it's the death of Little Horn that happens at the middle of the week. And the death of Little Horn occurs after he commits the abomination of desolation. But there was always in my mind a time problem. It seemed, it's possible, of course, that he sets up the abomination of desolation, goes inside the Holy of Holies, calls himself God, walks outside, goes up on a hillside somewhere nearby and gets killed. That's possible. That could all happen in one day. It's not a problem, right? It just seemed to me, though, that there's a lot going on during that time, and it always seemed to me that there would be a little span of time there where the abomination of desolation takes place, and then there's a reaction to that, and then within some few days, he finally gets killed on the mountainsides there on Zion. So anyway, then when I got to looking at this, I realized that while it's true that in the midst of the week, he causes the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, Daniel 9:27. What Daniel says in Daniel 11, verse 45, is that when Antichrist is cut off, you go to the next verse, you have Michael casting Satan out at that time, and we know that event marks the middle of the week. That's when, the devil gets cast out of heaven and to the earth. So anyway, I put together this, and then something else that's always troubled me began to kind of suggest a resolution to my mind. So the removal of the day of sacrifice occurs, and that probably occurs sometime leading up to the abomination of desolation. Now, I've already given all the arguments for that to support it, and I don't have time to go into it right now because this is just a review. So there's the removal of the day of sacrifice. He comes from the south. He turns his attention to Jerusalem. He goes into Zion. He removes the daily sacrifice, and then soon thereafter, it is possible, again, all this happens on the same day. It just doesn't look that way when I read it. So he goes there, he removes the daily sacrifice. There's a great war that goes on here. And then he sets up the abomination that makes desolate. And then, after that, he's killed. The event that, even if all those things occur at the same time, the same day, whatever, that's fine. But clearly, according to Daniel, the cutting off of the man of sin occurs at the middle of the week. And if you take Daniel 11:45 with Daniel 12:6-7, work we've done already, you can see that clearly. And that suggests a kind of resolve to another mystery. And that is the 1,290 days. There's a strange prophecy we're going to look at next week, the 1,290 days. And then the 1,300 and I think it's 35 days or 30 days. It's really a blessing that it's recorded in the Bible, so you can't forget it because it's right there for you. All right, if you forget, you just go back and get reminded. But there's a 1,260-day period that begins right here, according to Daniel. This is why we know that the cutting off of the man of sin is at the middle of the week. We know that because Daniel says that at the time he's cut off, there remains 1,260 days. And that is 3.5 years. And we know the whole week is 7 years long. And 3.5 is exactly 1/2 of that period of time. And that's why we know that this event occurs at the middle of the week. And that therefore, the abomination of desolation, and then before that, the removal of the day of sacrifice occur before you get to the exact middle of the week, which then makes the language in the midst of the week make sense. Why would he say in the midst of the week instead of at the middle of the week? Well, this would be a reason why. So we know that Little Horn is cut off at the middle of the week for reasons I've just pointed out. There's this 1,290-day prophecy. Nobody knows what to do with it. And some of the people who know most about what to do with it do ruinous things with it. So I'm going to put the caveat out right now. We really don't completely have a handle on what the 1290 days are all about. But we know, Daniel says, as he comes toward the end of his book, blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 300, that's at verse 11. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. Okay? Blessed is he that waiteth and cometh to the 1,330 days. This is strong evidence supporting my conclusion. You see, because Daniel said that there would be a time, times, and a half remaining after Antichrist is cut off. You got to listen closely to follow this. So, according to Daniel earlier, he said, how long? There should be a time, times, and a half. And we know a time is a year, times is 2 years, and a half is half of a year. We've shown that already with proofs in the scripture, so we know that that's a biblical understanding of that language. Daniel says the amount of time remaining from the time little horn is cut off is a time, times, and a half. That's 1,260 days. What we just read is that there would be a period of 1,290 days from the abomination of desolation to the end. Did you see that? That's 30 days more than the 1,260 days, isn't it? It really puts a lot of pressure on, well, a lot of support on my conclusion, and a lot of pressure on the old idea. Because according to Daniel, there aren't 1,260 days from the abomination of desolation. There are only there is 1,290 days. That pushes the abomination of desolation event 30 days before the middle. And it all makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, it relaxes the whole tension that I have consistently felt, almost from the very first time I read through Daniel, some tension I felt with these events, all occurring on the same day. Not tension because I have some difficulty believing they could all happen on the same day. How easily could all these things happen on the same day? Like, really easy. That's not a problem. The problem has been all the other stuff that's involved in those events. The great army that's given to Antichrist to overcome the daily sacrifice and to bring it to an end. That just sounds like something that is a war going on and a struggle and something happening. And I believe that is exactly how it all works out. So in the midst of the week doesn't mean at the middle, but in the middle period of the week. Okay, so we've gone through that we'll probably go through it a couple more times as it gets more and more clear as we move forward. Let's get into it. You should have received your notes by email this morning. You can print those off, or you can have Mrs. Scheibach print them off for you. If you want Mrs. Scheibach to print them off for you, it might be a month or two before you get them. Having nothing to do with her efficiency, but having to do with that cursed printer. We have a cursed printer, and that machine doesn't work, but she has them today. Hallelujah. So if you are among those who receive them, from Becky, raise your hand. She'll make sure you get it if you don't already have it. Daniel 12, now 5 to 13, that's going to be taught in 2 lessons. Today, we're going to take up Daniel's final vision, and then next Sunday, Daniel's delay, and then we're done with the book of Daniel, other than referring back to it as we're looking at the book of Revelation. Daniel 12 begins where Daniel and Revelation intersect, as we've already pointed out. A summary of what will occur during the second half of the week is all that's given to Daniel. And it's all about the beginning of the end. That's what Daniel takes the prophecies for all the way from the time that the kingdom was transferred to Nebuchadnezzar. He gives a prophecy that takes us all the way up to the beginning of the end. All right? And the beginning of the end is with the death of Antichrist. The angel is at the river Hiddekel. In Daniel 10 verse 1, and that is the mighty Tigris. It is second only to the Euphrates in historical significance. There's a map. The one on the farther east is the Tigris, the big blue line that wiggles along up there. You'll probably notice Baghdad. It all comes it comes from Kuwait, or the Persian Gulf, and then goes up. Anyway, so there it is. That's where Daniel was at, and he sees the dragon cast out of heaven, and that takes us to Revelation 12, verse number 5. And so that's where we are in prophecy. We're at the time of the end. We're at the end game here. The last inning is where we are in prophecy. Daniel's final vision, Daniel 12, 5 to 8. How long till the vision is fulfilled is the question that Daniel asks. And then we have Daniel's delay. And the question there is, what will conclude the prophecy? Now, Daniel's going to be given some insight on how long till the vision's fulfilled. But when he asks what will conclude the prophecy, he's going to be told, nope, we're not going there. And yet, God does give a little bit of a glimpse, just a little bit of a hint of some things that we'll look at next week. Daniel's final vision is where we are this morning. Daniel saw other two standing on either side of the bank of the river. Look at Daniel 12, verse 5. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, the one on this side of the bank of the river, and the other on that side of the bank of the river. Now, we've already identified the river. That's the Tigris. And we are interested in this language. Other two? Now, you wouldn't say other two unless there had been a prior two, wouldn't you? I mean, you understand what I'm saying? You would just say two. Two stood. One stood here, one stood there. But if you say the other two, then you are trying to differentiate these two from other two. So we're going to try to see and understand who these other two might be. But first, let's understand, in order to answer that question, we need to understand that there is an intersection between Daniel 8 and Daniel 12. As a matter of fact, as I've brought out in our study, that really at Daniel 8, from there forward, everything comes out of that prophecy. Daniel 7 kind of stands alone in a way. It intersects, of course, with Daniel 8 at the little horn. But Daniel 7 just gives us a kind of idea of how the geopolitical world will look at the time little horn arrives on the scene, with the lion and the wings of the eagle and all that business. Daniel 8 takes us from the ram, which is Persia, to the goat, which is Grecia, and then talks about how a horn from that goat, out of one of the horns of that goat, will come the Antichrist. So there's something significant about that third kingdom, and we've labored to show what that significance is. That's when the kingdoms of the world came under the power of Satan. That's when God gave the dominion to the power of Satan. And then, as you know, Jesus came, fought the devil, took that back, rose again, all power is mine now, that kind of thing's going on. And he stops the devil from raising up his man of sin and doing the rest of Daniel's prophecy here, bringing such great destruction upon the whole world, upon mankind. He stops that, puts his church in place, gives the church the keys of the kingdom and the gospel of the kingdom, and sends us into the world, declaring the terms of surrender to be saved from that wrath that's coming. To be saved from the day that Satan's going to have the world in his power. And so that's what we're doing right now. So there's an intersection there, and there's something that happens in Daniel 8 that's going to help us understand how to identify these other two. So, one example is Daniel 8. The angel revealed a vision to Daniel that he did not explain until after a hiatus of 7 years. Remember that? He gave Daniel a revelation, and then Daniel said, wow, what's all this about? What does this mean? He was troubled. He got sick. He got so troubled by it, he was sick. Remember at the end of Daniel 8? He was very disturbed. It isn't for 7 years until the angel comes back again to give him the rest of the story on the vision he received that's recorded in Daniel 8. And that sets the pattern of God revealing a certain thing to a prophet and then making them wait until a proper time to reveal the rest of it. So we see a delay in Daniel 12 too. He's going to say to Daniel, go thy way. It will be revealed in the end. Another delay. So that's one way that it kind of intersects. The point is that in Daniel 8, the angel concluded his vision by leaving him perplexed about certain questions. And that is what is occurring here in Daniel 12. Same thing. He's going to leave Daniel perplexed about certain questions. Only the wait time is going to be far more significant. Then it was 7 years and then actually 3 more years before it all started getting revealed to him. The angel is going to leave Daniel with an incomplete revelation concerning the end. Daniel 12:4 and then 8-9. From Daniel's perspective, it was necessary to differentiate the two he sees and hears speaking in Daniel 12 from the two saints whose conversation he was privileged to hear in Daniel 8. Come with me to Daniel 8 and let's see. So it's helpful to understand that Daniel 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 is a progression of visions that are all related to Daniel 8. So Daniel 8, he gets a vision, but he doesn't get it all. Daniel 9, the angel shows up to give him some more. Daniel 10, the angel shows up to give him some more. And then at that time, he gives him Daniel 10, 11, and 12. And so all of this is explaining Daniel 8. Now, I go into that in some detail in my book, so you can look at that later, and it will be helpful to you. Let me get my notes up here and try to catch up with myself. Okay, so who are these other two? Look at Daniel 8, look at 13 and 14. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And then he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And we've shown that those 2,300 days are literal 24-hour periods, because the language here, translated days, is Erev Beboker, which is evening and morning. That's the same language that's used in Genesis chapter 1, in the days of creation. And when that language is used consistently throughout the Bible, it always refers to a 24-hour period. We've already established all that. Now, notice Daniel sees two saints talking to each other. I believe, because you got to take it, like Daniel did. Daniel understood that this whole vision he's looking at, to get it all, you got to go from Daniel 8 to Daniel 12. That's the whole vision. That's all of it. Otherwise, you're getting pieces of it. See? A piece of it in Daniel 8, a piece of it in Daniel 9, a piece of it in 10, 11, and 12. You got it in pieces. But if you take it, if you understand it like I believe Daniel did, is this is all one revelation here, from Daniel 8 through Daniel 12. So Daniel felt the need, or the Holy Spirit wanted to make sure we understood, that the two he's identifying in Daniel 12 are not the two he identified in Daniel 8. And I worked awfully hard to make that point, but I think it was a pretty easy point, really. I realize right now how simply I could have done it. But sometimes I like to go the long way, right? But anyway, so that's what's going on there. The Lord is wanting us not to make the mistake. When he talks about two standing on either side of the river, most of us, I certainly can see myself doing this, would go, who are these two? And I'd go to Daniel 8, and I would see the two, And I'd say, oh, it's probably these two. I'm sure I would have done that. So thank you, Father. Because he put other two. I have no way of understanding otherwise why he would put other two there. Unless he wanted me to be sure I didn't make a mistake and get the wrong two. So other two. Who are these other two? That's interesting. Well, as I've said already, let me get past that. Let me get over here. Yeah. He sees these other two standing on each side of the great river, the Tigris. One of them asked a question of the man clothed in linen. He's going to ask a question of the man who's clothed in linen. And the other two, they talk to each other. But in these two, one of them talks to the one that's clothed in linen. Who is the man that's clothed in linen? That's the question. Well, if you look at Daniel 10, 5-6, once again, I have reason to say, you see what I mean? Why it's important to understand this is one continuous vision from 8 through. Otherwise, there are elements in this vision you won't understand without reference to the other parts of it. So, in Daniel 12, 6a, we see that one of these two that stand on either side of the Tigris asks the one clothed in linen, and Daniel expects us to know of whom he speaks when he speaks about the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river. All right? You go back to 10, 5-6, and you're looking at him. Then I lifted up mine eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. And this goes to show proof for so many things I'm bringing out. One of them is the interconnection between these chapters. We can't segregate Daniel 9 and 10 from Daniel 8. They're all interconnected all the way through. So therefore, we can't identify who the man clothed in linen is without Daniel 10. So we go to Daniel 10. And by the way, it's clear the Spirit expects us to do that. That's why he identified him that way. The man clothed in linen. Knowing we would go back into Daniel's prophecies and go, oh, here's a fellow clothed in linen. It must be him. Well, who is it? Well, that's Christ. It's a pre-appearance of Christ in that glory he enjoyed with the Father before the world was. And that's what you're looking at in Daniel 10, 5-6. You're looking at a depiction of Christ in his pre-incarnate glory. And it's beautiful. You can look at that and then read John 17 where Jesus says, Father, restore unto me the glory I had with thee before the world was. And you can look at Daniel 10 and see what he's talking about, to be restored to that glory. So, once again, we're obliged to hail back to Daniel 10, to the vision that he had at the beginning of this final encounter when at the side of the great river, Daniel lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body also was like a beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and his feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words like the voice of a multitude. And this comes so close to the description by the Apostle John of the vision of Christ that he received that it's kind of silly to try to differentiate them. I think it's the same person. We will deal with questions like, well, what about the differences in the descriptions? And I go into that in my book quite a bit, because there are some differences in the way Daniel describes this person and the way John describes him. And there's an important message in those differences, and something we're going to be giving some attention to when we go to Revelation 1 and we encounter him there. But I believe at the end of the day, it's the same person. I believe that this is a pre-incarnate manifestation of Jesus Christ our Lord. We have before shown then that this certain man is a pre-incarnate vision of Christ in that glory he enjoyed before the Father, or with the Father before the world was. Now, who are the other two then? And you see, this helps us identify who the other two are. We know it's not the two who spoke in Daniel 8 because we're told there are other two. These guys are standing, the personage is standing on that water. And these two are standing on either side. So some of you are already going to the conclusion before I take you there, but let's go ahead and work our way there anyway. The Bible teaches that only two very special persons are given the honor to take their place at the right and left hand of the Lord of glory. Mark 20, verse 23, Mark 10, verse 40, Zechariah 4, 3-11, and Revelation 11, 4. On the Mount of Transfiguration, Matthew 17, Jesus was manifested to Peter, James, and John in his kingdom glory. Matthew 17, 1 and 2. There are two highly esteemed saints who appeared there with him on either side of him, and they are Elijah and Moses. I believe the two Daniel saw on either side of the Tigris that were talking to the man clothed in linen are none other than Elijah and Moses. So why didn't Daniel identify him as Elijah and Moses? I don't know. I'm going to ask him when I get to heaven. So I don't know exactly why he didn't do that. But in any event, these are the only two who have been given such an honor anywhere in Scripture. It is reasonable then to suggest that Elijah and Moses are the other two that Daniel saw on either side of the river on which the Lord of glory stood. So the question asked of the man clothed in linen is this: how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And I've already labored on the context in which that question might be asked. Because as far as Daniel is concerned, 11 verse 45 ended it. All of his prophecies take us right up to the middle of the week. All of them do. He consistently gives us the prophecy concerning the little horn up to the point when he's destroyed. And so, since Daniel received another vision of these two talking and asking the Lord how long to the end of these visions, it would be perplexing to somebody who thought, well, I thought they just got ended. I thought we just finished it. So the angel had given Daniel a summary overview of what happens after Michael stands for Daniel's people during the time of unprecedented and unparalleled trouble to the end of this present evil world. Now Daniel's going to learn how long this time of trouble will last. And he's told it will continue for a time, times, and a half, which we've already labored to show means 3.5 years. And that's when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people. And at that time, all the wrath of God will come down on this wicked world ruler. So we have another intersection with Daniel 8, because that's what Daniel 8 talks about, the scattering of the holy people. And it talks about this man of sin rising up, little horn, and then scattering the holy people. The scattering of the power of the holy people refers us back to the vision of the daily sacrifice, Daniel 8, 11 to 13, 24, see also 7, 25. In each scenario, the little horn, who is the Antichrist, ramps up his evil to the place where he turns his full fury and wrath upon the holy people in what appears to be an effort to wipe them off the face of the earth, which is what the spirit of Antichrist is always rattling their sabers about over there in the Middle East right now. We're going to wipe the Jews out. We're going to drive them off into the sea. We're going to destroy all the Jews, right? That's constantly. That's that same spirit. It's already in the world, John said. So that spirit is here and in place and constantly driving the masses to do that. That's his passion, his bloodlust for the Jewish people. He hates the bloodline. He hates it, wants to destroy them. And of course, we are connected with them. He lumps us together. He doesn't like us either. Okay. So now he's going to answer the question. And let's look at the answer. The man clothed in linen is going to answer the question. He holds up his right hand unto heaven. This is interesting. Because if it's a pre-incarnate representation of Christ, and I'm sure that it is, you have Christ holding his right hand to heaven and swearing by him that liveth forever and ever, that it shall be for a time, times and a half. So you have Jesus Christ saying, this far and no farther. We're at the end. This is it. 3.5 more years, and we're going to put an end to this mess. So praise the Lord. And we know in Revelation that the beast is given 42 months, which is the same period of time, 3.5 years. 42 months is 3.5 years. So we know that's an intersection. That's why I said Daniel 12 intersects with Revelation in several points. So Daniel, however, complains that he doesn't understand something. Well, what is it that he doesn't understand? Right? He says, I don't understand. Look at Daniel 12, verse number 8. And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? So clearly, Daniel is perplexed. And it goes to what I've already pointed out. He doesn't, I thought we were done. I thought when that guy got killed in Daniel 11:45, I thought we were done. So what's going on here? Why are we, I thought this was over. We know he didn't have trouble with the language time, times and a half, because that comes up a couple of times earlier and he doesn't ask anything about it. So that isn't what it is he didn't understand. What he doesn't understand is, why is there any time left on the clock? I thought we ran it out. I thought it was over when Antichrist died. So Daniel says, I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? In other words, if the death of Antichrist isn't the end of it, what is? What is the end of these things? What did Daniel understand? He had no difficulty with the expression of time, times and a half, and the dividing of time, in Daniel 7:25, or in Daniel 11:35. No problem. So that's not the problem. It is unreasonable to assume Daniel did not understand what was meant by little horn having accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, because that came up in Daniel 8, and he didn't have a problem with that particular feature of the prophecy at that time. It seems to me that what confused Daniel is that so far as he understood, the little horn had come to his end at the middle of the 70th week. And so while here he is discovering that somehow he continues into the second half of the week and continues to pursue the holy people. That's what's puzzling Daniel. Makes sense. It would puzzle me too. Only we've been given the rest of the story. See? That Daniel doesn't get till later. That is the only part of all of this that seems to me that Daniel could possibly have not understood. Daniel asks, what shall be the end of these things? Daniel 12:8. And it is expressed as an exclamation. In other words, in the Hebrew language there, it's expressed as an exclamation. He's not just like, oh, that's interesting. So what's the end? It's more like, well, what will be the end of these things? It's an exclamation. It's almost as if to say, oh my Lord, when will all this finally end? And this suggests support for my supposition concerning what Daniel did not understand. It's easy to suppose that Daniel had thought the man of sin had come to his end and his brutality against his people was over, but now it appears that somehow he's going to continue brutalizing his people. And Daniel, in apparent exasperation, cries out, oh my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? It would seem that the expression these things refers to what was revealed in Daniel 12, verse number 7. And of course, that's the time of trouble. The time of trouble that will be upon the world. Daniel's is refused any further revelation concerning the last half of the 70th week beyond a kind of general overview that he has been given. And we'll look at that next week, Daniel 9 through 13, where God, it's really kind of a beautiful thing, where God, it's apparent loves Daniel. And he doesn't want to not tell him what he wants to know. It's interesting. And we'll see that clearly as we're going to look at this thing next week as we finish the book of Daniel. I thought there'd be at least one firework that would go off. Fill the room with all kinds of pretty stuff. Let's stand together, please.